What we're going to look today at is, first of all, cow-calf profitability. And I started in farm management in 2004. Okay, so 10 years ago, I taught for a couple of years in high school, and then I started farm management. And I've always had this soft spot for the cattle stuff. So I wanted to figure out how can we make more money with cattle. Because at that time, cattle production was kind of, everybody said there's no money in cattle, there's no money in cattle. Well, I figured it out after 7 years, and we can make a lot of money with cattle if the prices are high. Heard Carl say 2 or 3 times this morning, but the market's down, but Carl, the cattle price is still high.
Better than last year.
The cattle price is still at a point where we're going to make money, and that's what really matters, right? I passed around a sheet, and you can maybe see some of this stuff a little bit better, but without trying to step on anybody's toes, I think we're going to talk about budgets later and some of that sort of thing. You can see where cow-calf profitability in North Dakota was along this net return line. It's gotten as high as $241 per cow last year. And the 2014 projection, I went and looked at some of our numbers, saw where the costs were. I took the futures calf price earlier this fall. And when we do our cow-calf profit number, the cow-calf profit number is based on the day that you wean the calf. Okay? After you wean the calf, you're into a whole different enterprise. So we're just talking about from the day the calf is born till you wean the calf. Obviously you pay for the cow year round, but that day is when we're going to measure your profit, weaning the calf. So looking at the futures market in comparison to weaning time last year and some of the costs, added cost of bulls, added cost of bred heifers, I still think that 2014 we're going to come up statewide somewhere around $650 per head profit. There will be no time in the history of the farm management data that will have been even close to that. So it's obviously a good time for cattle right now. Some of the interesting things on this slide that you look at, and one of the reasons that I say the way to make more money in cattle is to have a higher price. If we look right here at some of the production data, over the last 5 years, we've weaned off the same size calves that we've always weaned off. There's not very much growth. We actually are weaning off less pounds per exposed female than we had 5 years ago, by 10 pounds less.
Why?
Why? That's a good question. I mean, my family sells bulls. I would like to think that we are raising better bulls that grow better, that are going to cause less problems, but why aren't anybody's calves heavier?
Because guys are calving later and weaning at the same time.
Do you think that everybody does, though?
No, but I bet there's enough people doing it to bring it down.
Okay, so maybe they're calving later. Okay, I'll take that excuse, but still, if I'm raising a bull that you're going to buy, and 20 years ago my weaning weight was 500 and now it's 700, why shouldn't that make up for the difference? Shouldn't the better genetics make up for the difference? That's a question that I have. It's something that I think people that are commercial cattle producers need to ask themselves, what's happening here? Why aren't we gaining the weight that we used to have on these calves? It's something that people that are seed stock producers need to take a real good look at as well, I think, because we'd like to think that we're all supplying these great genetics, but in the end we have the same size calves that we always had. So I think that's something that we really need to look at. The biggest thing to look at on this is the average prices went up that we receive for the calves. The average cost to keep your cow around for a year has also went up. So the only thing that's making a big difference and giving us profitability in cattle right now is the price. And if the price starts to slide, what's going to happen? Are our expenses going to get less? Steve and I have lots of data looking at corn, soybeans, whatever, for the last 5 years. It was a great upswing. You know, lots of people made $450 to $600 an acre on corn a couple years ago. We all know what's going to probably happen with those corn profits this year. What happens a lot of times is that we have a really good profit. This year I'm going to go buy a new chute. This year I'm going to go put up a bunch of corral panels. This year I'm going to do this and that. We add these expenses in, and pretty soon it's costing us a lot more. And we may think that I went and bought that new chute, that's a one-time expense. But we have to expense it out over the whole period of time that you own it. And so maybe your $50 per head depreciation this year doesn't hurt you as much as it might if the price goes down a lot. So those are some of the issues that we're looking at, I think, this winter with some of the farmers that had a lot of real good corn crops and bought a lot of new equipment. And that depreciation really now is coming back to look a little tougher than it looked when the prices had a real good outlook. So I think that as cattle producers, that's something really to keep in mind as time goes on. This just illustrates the fact that it gets more and more expensive to keep a cow around. We were talking about earlier different prices, and somebody said, I want to talk about $3,000 bred heifers. We can talk about that. We can talk about $6,000 bulls, and the area that's going to come in is this little yellow area right here. And it's a lot the same as buying a combine, but say we go and we buy a bull, and we're going to use him for 5 years. He's going to breed 30 head a year, so we're going to get 150 cows bred to him. If he cost $6,000, that was $40 per cow. Okay. When we go to sell that bull, we might get $2,000 back for him. So we're looking at a little bit better price. We're looking at what? $20, $25, $30. Okay. But that's where this number is going to come in. That's the cost that it took to replace that bull. So when we're looking at these prices right now and our inventory change costs, buying high dollar replacement stock, that's all going to come in down the road when we go to replace those ones. So that number doesn't look as bad right now because the call prices of the cows and the bulls that we're selling are pretty good. So I would expect that yellow part of the graph is going to get bigger as time goes on, just because of the costs of replacing the seed stock. The issue doesn't always come in as, will this $3,000 bred heifer cash flow? You hear a lot of people will say, well, if I can buy, or if I can save one calf by buying this, then it pays for itself. Well, eventually, you buy enough $25 shots or whatever it might be, pretty soon you're up to having to save 2 or 3 calves. And the same thing's true with some of these bred heifers. It's not that it's not workable, and it's not that they can't be paid for, but if the market turns on us, we have to find a way that they can still be profitable. So that's kind of the tough issue with that. We talked about the weaning weights versus pounds weaned per exposed female. If you turn a cow out in the pasture to be bred, you're going to pay for her whether she brings in a calf or not. Whether you think, oh, I've already rented the grass, yeah, you have, but a cow that was raising a calf could have ate that grass as well. You're probably going to end up feeding them a little bit into the fall after you PG them, find out that she's open, so she's still going to cost you some money. So the less cows that bring in a calf, obviously, the less weight per cow that was bred or turned out to be bred that we're going to have. And that's an issue that I think Steve especially would tell you that number really needs to be around 525 pounds as a good spot to be really profitable. And you can see that over the past few years we've been hovering right around that 500 pound mark. There's lots of things that can affect that. We could have a bad storm come through during calving. We could have some issues with a bull that went bad in the pasture, some of that kind of stuff. So there is going to be some fluctuation, but a good goal to shoot for is that 525. The price cycle in cattle, I think you probably talked about the price cycle in cattle. And the net return, you can see kind of will follow that, obviously. 2013, $236 a head. So a very profitable year for cattle compared to 2009 at $1.60. So get into looking at some stuff, and we're going to talk about the difference in profitability. And I had a lot of writing on this slide, but when we do our data, we have a high 20% profit group and a low 20% profit group. And over the past 15 years, that basically will differ by $350 a head. It didn't matter if it was 2009 when we made $1 on average. That means that the low profit lost $150 and the high profit made $150. When you really sit down and look at the numbers, in the end, they wean off pretty close to the same size calves. They sold the calves for within a ½ cent difference most years. Sometimes the low profit group actually sold their calves for more dollars per pound. Okay, so the big difference comes on the expense side. And I know that you have to feed your cows. I know that we have to give them some vaccinations. I know that we need to give mineral and all that sort of thing. But the issue comes as to how much of that can you do before you lose all your profit. Overhead and direct expenses on the low profit herds was $668. It cost them $280 more, or $240 more, to raise that cow for a year. They had an average net return of $10. The high profit herd had an average net return last year of $406. So it's $390 difference. And I think that the big thing to look at, on 150 cows in 1 year, that means that they made $52,500 more dollars. Over 5 years, that's $262,000. We're talking about over $250,000 on the same number of cows. So for the same amount of work, for the same amount of whatever you want to call it, they're making more money. And the big difference is in what it costs. I'm going to talk a little bit then now about backgrounding. And backgrounding over the years, it's had a negative year in the last 10, but most years you can add a little bit of value to your calves by background. Since nobody from my family is in here, we're going to talk about some numbers that we had, because one of my big things is we'll sit down to do numbers with our producers, and they'll tell us what their calves weighed when they weaned them, and we'll look at the sale tickets from when they sold them, and it's really hard to get a good grasp on what did you feed them, how long did you feed them, what did they actually gain, because a lot of the weaning numbers aren't actually from a scale. You know, I think they average 500 pounds. And over time, what I've learned is cattle guys think their cows weigh less than they do. They think their cows are heavier than they are, and a lot of them like to work for free. Because that's just the way that they've always done it, and that's the way that it is, and you know, that's how it goes. So I did my own little experiment. We feed with a feed wagon with a scale on it. I know what they got fed every day. I know what that costs per ton on the ration, and we weighed them in and we weighed them out in 30 days when we sold our steers. Okay. The cost of the ration, $84.77 a ton. Total cost for that 49 head for 28 days was $1,780. You know, you're talking about cost of gain. Cost of gain in a feedlot this fall with low price corn, 25 to 30 cents. It was really good. So you look at that sort of stuff. What I did was I took the value of those calves on the futures market, because there's such a spread when we take our calves to the sales barn. So-and-so's calves bring $10 more than these calves, and so you never know. Reputation, that sort of stuff makes a big difference. But if we looked at the futures market, we spent $36.33 in feed per head to gain $156 in value, just on the futures market. The overhead, the other direct like drugs, mineral, that sort of thing, and depreciation of the equipment and fuel was another $52. So it cost us $67.59 per head to gain $156 in value. Backgrounding in 2014 probably was profitable, but it's not going to set any records. And backgrounding early this fall was way better than backgrounding right now is going to be. If you're still backgrounding those calves, there's probably, hopefully some price protection was done before some of that sort of stuff, because as the time goes on, we lose value on the calves as they get heavier. it's going to be a little bit tougher to make that profit. So let's look at the whole scale of your cattle operation. How can you add profitability? I don't have a real good answer. Produce more pounds for the same cost. And that's something that I think is maybe a goal that could be out there, but it's also really, really tough because more pounds take more inputs equals more cost. You can try and become a low-cost producer. I get a lot of emails, sorts of things. Kid Farrow is a very famous low-input type deal. I get his updates every week when he sends them out. You can try and go that route, and maybe it works for you, and that's great. But I think probably the best thing to do is try and find a balance between the two. You need to know what it costs you to produce a pound of calf, and you need to figure out where you can make money and be happy at a level that you're at. So if you can somehow spend $1 to make $5 more, that's probably worth it. Is it worth it to spend $4.50 to make $5 more? I don't know. You know, all depends upon your time. You really want to watch the pounds weaned per exposed female. You know, I know that calving time in North Dakota, depending upon when you do it, sometimes January is the nicest day of the year to calve. Sometimes March gets kind of rough. But if you can keep more of those calves alive somehow, that'd probably be a good place to look at investing the money, because in the end, that's where you make the money, is selling the calf. One thing that I really like to take a look at lately as I get more into this kind of stuff, and it would go real well with your cover crops and some of the other stuff that's been talked about today, is pounds of calf produced per acre, or your profit per acre. We look at that really extensively with corn, with soybeans, with wheat. What was the profit per acre? And it comes down to a measurement of how you're using your assets. If you are a strictly cattle producer, we need to look at your pounds or profit per acre produced. If you're using your cropland to produce feed for your cattle, they still have to pay per acre in line with what the other crops are producing. Because that's where we get into this argument of should I keep my cows or should I sell them and focus on the farming? Well, over the last 5 years, when you really looked at profit per acre, if you looked at your cattle versus your corn, that was really a no-brainer. You worked really hard to get your cattle to produce a few dollars an acre when that corn was a lot easier. You know, you go out and you spray it once with Roundup, once or twice, and seed it, and it just made it look really, really good. So if you're doing something where you're producing your own feed, using your own land, that sort of thing, you can look at the pounds of calf or the profit per acre, and that will give you a real good idea of where your whole operation is at. Then the last thing I think is to look at some value-added options. If you can find a way to directly market your steer calves, if you can keep your heifers around and sell them as bred heifer replacements, anything that would add some value to what you're doing to be able to get you a little bit higher price for your product.
Just doing high profit, low profit, Jory, expenses was a big difference. Do you see any similarities between the expenses? Which one is easier? Similarities between, is it feed, replacements?
When I made this list yesterday, I was looking at this. Low profit herds had a higher cost per cow per feed, $12. Higher cost for vet supplies, $7. Higher cost for fuel and oil, $10. I just mean, it's everything at about the same level, and it doesn't matter. And I don't know, I can't tell you why, because if I really get into our numbers and look, sometimes it's not the big operation that has the low cost. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not the guy that you wouldn't think is making any money that's not making money. He might be the high profit herd. I mean, cattle is something that's totally different to figure out than everything else. And
it's hard to starve a profit off a cow.
Right. Nathan Spickler told me a story his dad always told him. You know, we were talking about this. We were out there looking at the cover crops that they had and whatever, and his dad always said he thought he could teach his horse to live on less feed And so he fed him less feed, and he fed him less feed, and pretty soon he wasn't feeding him any feed, and then he didn't have to feed the horse anymore. You know? And so our cows can only get so cheap. We can only do it for a bottom line of a certain price, and that's the best it's going to be.
I look at your summary at the left-hand column, bottom, it says 20% low herds at an average of 92 cows, high profit herds at 157. So I always think of running numbers as
right. And
economies of scale. Does that really show up, or do you really have a wide range in low profit, a wide range in high profit?
Where that really shows up is not so much on the cost per cow, direct costs or overhead costs. Well, I shouldn't say that. Partly overhead costs, but a huge difference in depreciation. Okay? If you have a tractor to feed 92 cows versus a tractor to feed 150 cows, that does make a big difference. But that's no different than if you have 1,000 acres of land for a combine or 1,500. That's the economies of scale are going to play into that. I use example, over the past 5 years, some of the farmers that we work with, I can think of one specific example where, well, there's not one specific example because it's probably 5 or 6 smaller farms that did the same thing, but they had a 1680 case combine and they had a good year and they decided they wanted to upgrade their combine, so they bought a used 2388. Well, then the next 2 years were really good and they needed to spend some money so they didn't have to pay taxes, so they bought an 8180 brand new combine, and we went from, on the same amount of acres, depreciating a $110,000 piece of equipment each year to depreciating a $350,000 piece of equipment each year. And that's a big overhead depreciation cost that we don't always take into consideration. And it would be no different than if you used to buy $2,500 bulls and now you buy $7,000 bulls.